The day an entitled senator's son met the one judge money couldn't buy. The television courtroom had never witnessed such pure, unfiltered contempt for the law itself. Chase Thornton III, the 24-year-old son of Senator Robert Thornton, stood before America's most respected and feared television judge with a smirk so arrogant it could have fueled 1,000 viral memes. His designer sneakers, worth more than most people's monthly rent, were propped casually on the defendant's table as he laughed directly in Judge Greg Mathis's face. The words that spilled from his mouth would be his last as a free man. "My father makes more in a week than you've made in your entire pathetic career, old man. You can't touch me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every person in that courtroom knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented, something that would change everything. Judge Mathis's eyes narrowed into the kind of predatory focus that had been forged over decades of judicial work, a career that began not in a law school lecture hall, but on the streets of Detroit, Michigan, in the very kind of neighborhood that politicians like Senator Thornton made promises to every 4 years and then forgot about. Judge Mathis had been homeless. He had been in the system. He had been the young man that society wanted to discard. And then, through grit and mentorship and an iron refusal to accept the story the world had written for him, he had become the law. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, toward a sealed manila envelope resting on his desk. What happened in the next 60 seconds would end Chase Thornton's freedom, obliterate his father's Senate career, and prove to millions of watching Americans that no amount of money or political power can save you when you commit a federal crime on live television. Subscribe now so you never miss these explosive courtroom moments where entitled criminals finally face the judge that money cannot buy. Hit that notification bell, because what Judge Mathis reveals inside that sealed envelope will shake you to your core. Chase Thornton III had never faced real consequences for anything in his entire life. Born into a $340 million family fortune, he had spent 24 years learning that rules were for other people, that money could buy anything, including freedom, and that his father's political connections made him essentially untouchable. He drove a $400,000 candy apple red Lamborghini Aventador with vanity plates that read "Unchable," a not so subtle announcement to the world that he existed above the law. His Instagram account, followed by 340,000 people who celebrated his cruelty as entertainment, showcased a greatest hits collection of entitled behavior that would make most people physically sick. Videos of him making homeless people dance for dollar bills. Photos of him tipping waitresses in Monopoly money. Posts mocking what he called poverty mobiles and broke losers. This was a young man whose entire identity revolved around humiliating people who couldn't fight back and documenting their pain for social media engagement. Judge Mathis had grown up around people just like Marcus Webb, people who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't get ahead, people the system was designed to overlook. He knew what rigged looked like. He knew what money-buying silence looked like. And when that sealed manila envelope landed on his desk 3 days before filming, he had stared at the name Chase Thornton III for a long, quiet moment and thought, "Not this time." Chase's arrest record read like a greatest hits album of entitled criminality. 6 arrests before age 24, 2 DUIs, one of which hospitalized a single mother and her 2 young children, cocaine possession with intent to distribute, aggravated assault against a bartender who refused to serve him, securities fraud for an insider trading scheme, sexual assault allegations that mysteriously vanished after $1 million settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Every single time, within hours of being booked, Chase walked free. His father's attorneys would arrive with briefcases full of legal threats and political pressure. Charges would be dropped or reduced to meaningless citations. Victims would go silent after receiving anonymous payments. The system bent itself into pretzels to protect Senator Thornton's precious son. Senator Robert Thornton had spent an estimated $8.7 million over 6 years covering up his son's crimes, destruction, and cruelty. Keeping a white shoe law firm on a $50,000 per month retainer specifically to handle what they euphemistically called Chase's situations. The case that brought Chase into Judge Mathis's courtroom seemed simple on its surface. Marcus Webb, a 19-year-old college student working as a valet to pay his tuition, was suing Chase for $8,500 in damages. 4 months earlier, Chase had shown up at an upscale Manhattan restaurant with his crew of equally entitled friends, all driving six-figure luxury vehicles. Marcus had parked Chase's Lamborghini carefully and professionally, as he did with every vehicle entrusted to him. But Chase, drunk and showing off for his friends, decided to do aggressive donuts in the valet parking area when he left. He lost control, and his Lamborghini's rear bumper tore into Marcus's 2008 Honda Civic, completely ripping off the driver's side door, shattering windows, and damaging the frame beyond repair. Chase had literally totaled the car that represented 4 years of Marcus's savings. Instead of apologizing or exchanging insurance information like a decent human being, Chase took selfies with the wreckage and posted them to Instagram with the caption, "Whoops, ran into some peasant's rust bucket. Hashtag who cares? Hashtag daddy will fix." When Marcus begged him to at least provide insurance information, Chase laughed in his face and said, "Insurance is for poor people. Sue me. Oh wait, you can't afford a lawyer." That destroyed Honda Civic wasn't just transportation for Marcus, it was his lifeline, his way to get to his valet job and his college classes, his means of driving home to check on his 14-year-old sister who had type 1 diabetes and needed $400 of insulin every single month. Without that car, Marcus had been taking 3 buses each way for 4 months, adding 4 hours of daily commute time that destroyed his sleep schedule, his grades, and his family's already fragile stability. The $8,500 Chase refused to pay represented 4 months of wages, money Marcus desperately needed to replace the vehicle that Chase had destroyed for Instagram content. What made this case truly explosive was what nobody in that courtroom except Judge Mathis actually knew. This wasn't really about a damaged car. Judge Mathis had spent the previous 72 hours coordinating with FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and Justice Department officials. That sealed manila envelope on his desk contained evidence of federal crimes that Chase Thornton III had committed, crimes serious enough to send him to prison for decades. Wire fraud defrauding 340 investors out of $4.2 million through a fake cryptocurrency scheme. Tax evasion totaling $3.8 million in unpaid federal taxes over 6 years. Witness tampering, interstate commerce violations, and a smoking gun party video of Chase bragging, "My dad owns half these people. I could murder someone on 5th Avenue and walk free. I'm literally untouchable." Judge Mathis's appearance today wasn't random entertainment. It was a carefully orchestrated federal trap. The moment Chase mocked a federal officer on camera, he would give prosecutors the final piece of evidence needed to ensure he could never escape justice again. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., Senator Robert Thornton was watching a monitor in his private office, having been told 30 minutes earlier that he needed to see what was about to happen to his son. He had no idea his entire political career was about to implode alongside his son's freedom. Smash that like button if you believe rich kids who think they're above the law deserve real consequences. Subscribe so you never miss these explosive courtroom moments. What Judge Mathis reveals in that sealed envelope will prove that justice can strike faster than a spoiled rich kid can dial his daddy's lawyer. Marcus Webb sat in the plaintiff's chair with his weathered folder clutched tightly against his chest, trying not to let his hands shake. At 19 years old, he was the first person in his family to attend college, a milestone that had made his parents cry tears of joy the day his acceptance letter arrived. His mother worked as a hospital janitor on the night shift, a grocery store cashier during the day, and cleaned houses on weekends. His father drove for a rideshare company during morning rush hour, worked construction in the afternoons, and did security guard shifts 3 nights a week. Between them, they worked 6 jobs to help Marcus afford tuition at City College, where he was studying civil engineering with dreams of building infrastructure in the underserved communities that politicians like Senator Thornton ignored. Marcus himself worked as a valet every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shifts that left him exhausted but determined. He made $11 per hour plus tips, and every 2 weeks, he sent half his earnings home to help cover his sister's insulin. This lawsuit represented his last hope. He had borrowed $150 from his church to file the small claims case, money the congregation had pooled together after hearing his story. He had spent 60 hours preparing his evidence. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about refusing to let entitled bullies crush working people without consequence. His mother had hugged him before he left for the courtroom and whispered words he would never forget. Sometimes David has to face Goliath. You have truth on your side, mijo. Justice will find you. Marcus nodded and tried to believe her. Now, sitting across from Chase, as he scrolled through his phone with complete indifference, Marcus prayed she was right. The courtroom that day was not what it appeared to be. 4 FBI agents sat scattered throughout the audience in plain clothes, ready to move the instant Judge Mathis gave the signal. The man at the bailiff's desk was a United States Marshal with 20 years of experience executing federal arrest warrants. In the monitor room backstage, a federal prosecutor sat with a signed arrest warrant waiting. The 60-second timeline had been planned down to the second. Judge Mathis had told his producers the night before, "This boy thinks he's untouchable. He's about to learn what I learned a long time ago. Nobody is above the law. Not a senator's son, not a senator, not anyone. I've been waiting my whole career for a case like this." Chase Thornton III walked into the courtroom 15 minutes late, wearing $3,500 Gucci sneakers and an $8,000 designer jacket, AirPods still in his ears. He threw himself into the defendant's chair with his feet up on the table. The audience gasped at the sheer disrespect. Judge Mathis looked at him the way a man looks at something he has already figured out. No surprise, no anger. Something colder and more precise than anger. Recognition. Judge Mathis began calmly. "Mr. Thornton, thank you for joining us." Chase barely looked up. "Yeah, whatever. Can we make this quick? I have a yacht party at 4 o'clock. A ripple of disbelief moved through the audience. Judge Mathis did not react. He simply folded his hands and waited, the way a man waits when he already knows the end of the story. Marcus presented his evidence with trembling hands. Photos of his destroyed Honda Civic, police reports, witness statements, Text messages where Chase had mocked him after the incident. "Cry harder, broke boy." As Marcus broke down describing his sister's medical bills and his mother's 3 jobs, Chase laughed openly and started recording him on his phone. Judge Mathis's voice cut through the room. "Mr. Thornton, put the phone away." Chase smirked. "It's a free country. I can record whatever I want." "That is your only warning," Judge Mathis said. His voice was quiet. His eyes were not. Chase rolled his eyes and kept the phone in his hand. He was performing now for his followers, for his crew, for the universe of entitled fantasy he had built where he was the only person who mattered and everyone else was furniture. Judge Mathis asked the critical question, "Did you damage Mr. Webb's vehicle?" Chase leaned back with pure, marinated contempt. "His piece of junk was in my way. I did him a favor. Now he can get an Uber like normal people." The audience gasped. Judge Mathis stated plainly, "You owe him $8,500 for the destruction you caused." Chase's grin widened. "Yeah, that's not happening." Then came the question that was never really a question, the key in the lock. "Mr. Thornton, do you understand that you are under oath and legally obligated to tell the truth?" Chase looked at Judge Greg Mathis, a man who had grown up with nothing, who had clawed through poverty and the justice system and been written off by every institution that Chase's father now ran, and decided, with the bottomless confidence of the irredeemably privileged, that he was the more powerful person in the room. He was wrong. Under oath? Man, this isn't real court. You're a washed-up TV judge playing pretend in a fake courtroom. My father makes more in a week than you've made in your entire pathetic career. You can't touch me. You never could. Nobody can. The courtroom went completely, utterly, historically silent. You could hear the air conditioning. You could hear someone in the back row hold their breath. You could hear, if you listened carefully, the sound of 24 years of consequence arriving all at once. Judge Mathis's face did not crumble. It did not flush with anger. Something shifted behind his eyes, a stillness, a certainty. The expression of a man who has just watched a door he left open be walked through exactly as planned. His hand moved to the sealed manila envelope. He opened it slowly, deliberately, like a man who has all the time in the world because, for the first time, time is entirely on his side. "Mr. Thornton," Judge Mathis said, his voice low and even, carrying to every corner of that silent room. "You are correct that my courtroom is arbitration, not criminal court." Chase's grin began its slow return. He thought he'd won. "However," and that single word hit the room like a gavel, "threatening and showing contempt toward a federal officer is a crime, and I am a federal officer on assignment." Chase's smile faltered. The color drained from his face. "These documents detail $4.2 million in federal wire fraud, $3.8 million in tax evasion, witness tampering, interstate commerce violations, and your name is on every single page." Chase stumbled to his feet. The chair scraped back. His voice cracked for the first time in his life. "You can't, my father, he'll..." Judge Mathis's voice cut like a blade. "Your father is watching this live from his Senate office. He was notified 30 minutes ago." Chase grabbed frantically for his phone with shaking hands, the same phone he'd been using to record Marcus Webb's pain for entertainment just minutes before. "You are now in violation of a federal judge's direct order. Put the phone down or add another charge to the list." Chase's voice climbed an octave. "You set me up." Judge Mathis looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every person Chase Thornton had ever humiliated, cheated, bought off, or written off. Every valet, every bartender, every victim who had signed an NDA because they had no other choice. Every person told they couldn't fight back because they couldn't afford to. No, Mr. Thornton, you destroyed your own life. I simply provided you the room. He nodded toward the back. The man Chase assumed was just a bailiff stood and kept standing, revealing a United States Marshal's badge that caught the studio lights. 4 more figures rose simultaneously from the audience. The FBI agents, plainclothed, had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Chase screamed. The performance of invincibility collapsed into raw panic. "Wait! Dad! Call the lawyers! Call everyone! Dad!" The marshal walked forward with the unhurried calm of a man who has done this 1,000 times. "Chase Thornton III, you are under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, witness tampering, and contempt of a federal officer. You have the right to remain silent." Handcuffs clicked at 58 seconds. Chase screamed as they moved him toward the exit, his $3,500 sneakers dragging on the studio floor. "Do you know who my father is?" Judge Mathis watched him go. Then he turned directly to the camera and delivered the line that would be replayed on television and social media for years. "Yes, and after today, the whole world will know your father as one thing above everything else, the father of a convicted felon serving 15 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Marcus Webb sat frozen in the plaintiff's chair, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of sadness, the kind that come when something you stop believing in suddenly turns out to be real. Justice. Actual, undeniable justice. His mother had been right. Subscribe right now, because what happened next to Marcus Webb, Senator Thornton, and Chase Thornton III inside that federal penitentiary is something you will not want to miss. Judge Mathis just changed everything. Hit that bell. Within minutes of Chase's arrest, social media detonated. The hashtag Senator's Son Arrested hit #1 worldwide trending in 18 minutes. The video was shared 2.8 million times in the first hour. Chase's 340,000 Instagram followers, those same people who had spent years liking his post about peasants and broke losers, turned on him with the particular ferocity of people who want desperately to distance themselves from something ugly they helped build. Senator Robert Thornton released an emergency statement, but it was immediately drowned out by the Washington Post, which dropped a bombshell investigation. Senator spent $8.7 million covering up son's crimes. Calls for his resignation came from both parties within 2 hours. Marcus Webb's life transformed overnight. Strangers launched a GoFundMe that raised $340,000 in 24 hours. Universities offered full scholarships. Engineering firms sent formal job offer letters to a 19-year-old valet who had shown up to court with a borrowed folder and his church's $150. He used a portion of the money to pay off his family's medical debt completely, enough to cover 3 years of his sister's insulin. He graduated top of his engineering class and started a foundation helping service workers fight wealthy abusers. Chase's federal trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 12 counts. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no parole. He currently sits in a Pennsylvania facility where inmates know exactly who he is. Senator Thornton resigned 3 days after the arrest and now faces his own criminal charges for obstruction of justice, misuse of campaign funds, and bribery. His wife filed for divorce. The $340 million family fortune was frozen. Judge Mathis's case became taught in law schools nationwide, not just as a legal case, but as proof of what the justice system is capable of when guided by people with the courage to stand up. Judge Mathis said it best in an interview afterward. This boy thought he walked into a TV courtroom. He didn't. He walked into the consequence he'd been running from his entire life. It just took 24 years to catch up to him. This story proves what millions knew but needed confirmed. No money, no connections, no family name protects you when you commit crimes on live television in front of a federal officer who spent his entire career fighting for the people this system tried to throw away. Subscribe so you never miss these explosive moments where entitled criminals finally face the consequences they've spent their lives avoiding.